Welcome back to our channel. Today, we explore 3 dramatic stories where power and patience collide. From an unreasonable neighbor trying to take over your land, to a grumpy McDonald's customer, and finally an overbearing relative with a spoiled child, each story offers a lesson in calmness, boundaries, and dealing with difficult personalities. If you've ever encountered these situations, this is the video for you. Let's get started. I remember the first time I visited my friend Ben at his dad's house in the hills. It was a stunning property, perched on a steep slope with a breathtaking view of the valley below. But the terrain was challenging. Every driveway in the area had to wind its way up from the main road, as a straight path would violate local building codes for being too steep. Ben's dad, Richard, had lived there for decades, and his neighbors, Frank and Martha, were an elderly couple who had become like family to him. Frank and Martha were the kind of neighbors everyone wished for. Warm, polite, and always ready to lend a hand. They lived a few houses down, and though their property included a vacant lot next to their home, they'd never developed it. That lot had recently been sold to a new owner, and construction on a house had begun. None of us thought much about it at first. Construction was pretty common in the area as more people moved to the hills for the views and tranquility. One Saturday, as I was visiting Ben, Frank and Martha stopped by Richard's place looking unusually upset. I overheard snippets of their conversation. A huge scar on the hill! And he didn't even ask. Curious, I joined Ben on the porch where Frank was explaining the situation. "We came home yesterday," Frank said, shaking his head, "and there was this massive dirt path carved right through the side of our hill. It cuts across the corner of our lot and winds up to where they're building that new house." Martha chimed in, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "We thought it might be a mistake, so we walked over to speak with the construction crew. The guy operating the excavator was polite enough and gave us the owner's number, but when Frank called him..." She trailed off, looking at Frank, who sighed deeply. "The guy outright refused to acknowledge it was our property. He claimed the driveway was on his land and accused us of trying to make trouble." Richard frowned. "Did you check the property lines?" Frank nodded. "Twice. They haven't moved. It's our land, no doubt about it." "And he still wouldn't listen?" Ben asked. Frank shook his head. "Nope. He just got louder and ruder with every conversation. He said the driveway is necessary and that he's not changing anything." The more Frank and Martha spoke, the clearer it became that their new neighbor Jacob wasn't the type to back down. Instead of working with them to resolve the issue, he was doubling down, insisting that the driveway was fine where it was. It didn't matter to him that it cut across Frank and Martha's lot, or that they hadn't given permission. Richard, always the mediator, suggested they try speaking with Jacob face to face. "Sometimes it's easier to work things out in person," he said. "Maybe he'll be more reasonable if you meet him." Frank didn't look convinced, but Martha nodded. "It's worth a try," she said. The following week, I joined Ben at his dad's house again, and this time, we saw Frank and Martha heading up the hill toward the construction site. They seemed determined, but cautious. A little while later, they returned, looking even more upset than before. "He wouldn't even come out to meet us," Martha said. "We stood there waiting while he watched us from the window of his car. Finally, one of the workers came over and said Jacob wasn't available." Frank added, "It's clear he's not interested in talking. He knows he's in the wrong, but doesn't care. He figures we won't do anything about it because we're old and don't want the hassle." Richard sighed. "That's infuriating. But what can you do if he won't talk?" Frank hesitated. "We don't want to go to court. It's expensive, and honestly, we don't want to escalate things. But we also can't let him walk all over us." As the weeks went on, the situation grew more tense. The driveway remained a glaring scar across Frank and Martha's land, and Jacob continued to act as if he had every right to be there. He never made an effort to contact Frank and Martha or even acknowledge their concerns. What made it worse was the sheer disregard Jacob had for the damage he'd caused. The once beautiful slope on their property now looked like a construction zone, with exposed dirt and rocks scattered everywhere. Rain would eventually wash the loose soil down, creating even more problems. It had been a tense few weeks since the whole driveway incident began, and tensions in the neighborhood were at an all-time high. The new neighbor, Jacob, had shown no interest in resolving the issue amicably, continuing his construction as if Frank and Martha's land didn't matter. Every day, the sound of machinery echoed across the hill, a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict. That's when my friend Ben's dad, Paul, stepped in. Paul had lived in the neighborhood for years and was known for his laid-back demeanor and a knack for creative problem-solving. He got along with everyone, and Frank and Martha were no exception. When he ran into them during one of his morning walks, they shared their frustrations with him, recounting how Jacob had refused to acknowledge their property boundaries and dismissed their concerns. Paul listened intently, nodding along as they spoke. By the time they finished, his face had taken on a rare expression of anger. "That's just not right," he said firmly. "You've tried to handle this the polite way, and he's taking advantage of you. Let me think about this for a bit." Later that evening, after a couple of beers on his back porch, Paul came up with a plan. He called Frank and Martha to explain it, and they laughed at the sheer audacity of his idea. "Go for it," Frank said, chuckling. "We've got nothing to lose." With their blessing, Paul sprang into action. He hopped into his old, rusted F-150 pickup, so ancient and beat up it looked like it might crumble apart at any moment, and drove it down to Frank and Martha's property. Carefully positioning the truck, he parked it diagonally across the encroaching driveway. He made sure every inch of the truck was on Frank and Martha's land, not Jacob's, and left a note taped to the windshield with his phone number in case anyone wanted to discuss it. The next morning, chaos erupted. The construction crew arrived early, as usual, only to find their path completely blocked by Paul's truck. They tried to figure out how to proceed, but it was clear there was no way they could move their heavy machinery up the hill without access to the driveway. The scarred hill was steep and treacherous, and the truck was positioned perfectly to prevent any work from continuing. One of the workers spotted the note on the truck and called Paul. "Hey, is this your truck blocking the driveway?" the man asked, clearly frustrated. "Yep, that's mine," Paul replied cheerfully. "And no, I won't be moving it. I parked it there with permission from the property owners. If you've got a problem, take it up with them." "But we need to get to work," the worker protested. "You can't just leave it there." "Well," Paul said casually, "if you or anyone else tries to tow it, you'll be trespassing and committing theft, and I'm pretty sure none of you want a legal mess on your hands." The worker hung up, grumbling, and relayed the message to the crew. With no other options, they called Jacob to explain the situation. Jacob, already annoyed by the delays, was furious. He called Frank and Martha immediately, ranting about how they were holding up his project. "You need to move that truck," Jacob demanded, his voice practically shaking with anger. "I have deadlines to meet, and you're causing unnecessary problems." Frank remained calm, his voice measured. "The truck is on our property," he said. "If you want it moved, we can talk about resolving the property line issue first." "This is absurd," Jacob fumed. "You can't just block my driveway." "It's not your driveway," Martha chimed in. "It's ours. You built it without asking, and now you're reaping the consequences." Jacob shouted a few more insults before hanging up, but it was clear he was beginning to realize he couldn't strong-arm his way through the situation. His construction crew refused to carry their tools and materials up the steep hill by hand, and the truck wasn't going anywhere until he came to the negotiating table. Over the next few days, the standoff continued. Jacob made a few half-hearted attempts to intimidate Frank and Martha into moving the truck, but they stood their ground. Paul, meanwhile, was loving every moment of it. He checked on the truck daily, making sure it remained firmly parked in place, and kept in close contact with Frank and Martha to make sure they were comfortable with how things were progressing. Eventually, Jacob realized he had no choice but to negotiate. With his construction crew refusing to work and the delays costing him time and money, he called Frank and Martha to propose a deal. The elderly couple, as kind as they were, weren't about to let him off the hook without proper compensation. After a few rounds of negotiations, they agreed on a settlement. Jacob would pay them a significant sum for an easement, essentially buying the legal right to keep the driveway crossing a small portion of their land. In return, they allowed him to finish construction and complete his driveway, but only after the payment was made in full. With the agreement finalized, Paul finally moved his truck and the construction resumed. Frank and Martha, relieved to have the ordeal behind them, invited Paul over for a celebratory dinner and presented him with a few cases of his favorite beer as a thank you. "You're a real hero, Paul," Frank said, raising a glass. "We couldn't have done this without you." Paul shrugged, a grin spreading across his face. "Sometimes all you need is a little creativity and a rusty old truck." As for Jacob, he kept his distance from Frank and Martha after that. The agreement may have resolved the driveway issue, but he knew better than to test their resolve again. And for the rest of the neighborhood, Paul's legendary truck stunt became the stuff of local lore, a reminder that even the most entitled individuals could be put in their place with a little ingenuity and determination. My wife has a cousin named Linda, and let's just say she has a reputation in the family. Linda grew up in a privileged household, the daughter of two highly successful doctors who owned a sprawling estate with a massive house sitting on 40 acres of pristine land. She never had to want for anything, and it showed in her personality. Linda was the kind of person who believed the world revolved around her. Over the years, that entitlement trickled down to her daughter, Olivia, who, at 6 years old, was already displaying many of the same traits as her mother. Linda and Olivia's visits were rare but memorable, mostly for the wrong reasons. Linda had a habit of dropping by unannounced, bringing chaos wherever she went. Olivia, in turn, was the quintessential spoiled child, demanding, unwilling to share, and prone to tantrums when things didn't go her way. My wife and I had become adept at keeping our distance from them, but one day, Linda called out of the blue. "I was thinking of stopping by with Olivia," Linda said casually over the phone. "She's been asking to play with your daughter, Emma. Is now a good time?" It wasn't. Emma had just gone down for her afternoon nap, and everyone in the family knew she was a deep sleeper who needed her rest. I explained this to Linda, thinking she'd understand. "I don't think it's a good time right now," I said politely. "Maybe we can set something up later this week?" "Oh, it's fine," Linda replied breezily. "We'll just come over and wait until she wakes up." Before I could protest further, Linda hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Within 20 minutes, her car was in my driveway, and Linda was at the door, Olivia in tow. "We'll just hang out until Emma wakes up," Linda announced cheerfully as she stepped past me into the house, Olivia clutching a toy she'd brought from home. I didn't even have a chance to refuse. Linda settled herself on the couch, and Olivia wasted no time making herself at home. She immediately began rummaging through Emma's toy box, pulling out whatever caught her eye. Before long, she discovered a set of colorful toy horses Emma adored and began playing with them as if they were her own. I tried to remain patient. Linda, oblivious as always, started chatting away about her latest crisis, an argument with her husband over whether they should buy a Porsche or a BMW for their next car. "It's just exhausting," she said with a dramatic sigh, as if she were grappling with life's greatest hardship. I nodded politely, though I wasn't listening. My eyes kept drifting to Olivia, who was now fully engrossed in the toy horses, arranging them into neat little rows and galloping them across the coffee table. Linda, of course, didn't notice or didn't care. After about 40 minutes of this, I finally said, "Linda, I don't think Emma will be waking up anytime soon. Maybe we can plan another day for them to play." Linda glanced at her phone, shrugged, and replied, "Well, we've already been here this long. We might as well wait. I didn't drive all this way just to turn around and go home." I clenched my jaw but managed to keep my tone polite. "I really think it's best if we call it a day. Emma's a deep sleeper, and Olivia looks like she's starting to get hungry." Almost as if on cue, Olivia complained, "I'm hungry." I braced myself for what was coming. Before Linda could suggest I prepare a snack for her daughter, I firmly said, "Why don't we pack up and get you both home?" It sounds like Olivia could use something to eat. Reluctantly, Linda agreed. "All right, Olivia, let's go," she said, standing up and brushing imaginary dust off her designer jeans. But Olivia didn't move. She clutched the toy horses tightly and refused to let go. "No, Mommy! I want these! I'm taking them home!" she whined, hugging the horses to her chest. "Olivia, those belong to Emma," I said gently, crouching down to her level. "You've had fun with them today, but they need to stay here." "No!" Olivia shouted, turning her back to me and clutching the toys even tighter. I looked to Linda, expecting her to step in, but she just stood there with an exasperated expression, as if this were somehow my problem to solve. "Olivia," I said again, trying to keep my voice calm, "these toys aren't yours. You need to leave them here." Linda finally spoke, though it was far from helpful. "Olivia, sweetheart, why don't you let Emma keep her toys?" she said half-heartedly. Then turning to me, she added with a shrug, "I don't think she's going to give them up. Maybe you should just buy Emma some new ones." I stared at her in disbelief. "Linda, these are Emma's toys. I'm not going to replace them just because Olivia wants them." Linda rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. They're just toys. It's not a big deal." At this point, my patience was running thin. I reached for the horses, gently but firmly pulling them from Olivia's grip. She let out an ear-piercing scream, stomping her feet and crying as if I'd just committed the ultimate betrayal. Linda scooped her up, glaring at me as if I were the one at fault. "Great!" Linda snapped. "Now she's going to cry all the way home. Thanks for that." I stood my ground, holding the horses in my hands. "They're Emma's," I said simply. "If Olivia's upset, that's something you'll have to address, Linda." Linda huffed, muttering under her breath as she carried Olivia out the door. "Selfish," she grumbled, "all over some stupid toys." After Linda stormed out of my house with Olivia still crying in her arms, I thought that would be the end of it, at least for the day. I'd done what any reasonable parent would do, protect my child's belongings and set boundaries, but of course with Linda it was never that simple. Less than an hour later, while Emma was still napping peacefully, my phone buzzed with a message from my wife, Claire. "Did something happen with Linda?" Her text read. "She's been texting the family." I sighed, already bracing myself for the fallout. Claire and I had dealt with Linda's antics before, so I knew she would have spun the story to make herself look like the victim. I quickly replied, "She came over unannounced, let Olivia play with Emma's toys, and then tried to leave with them. I told her no. That's it." Within minutes, Claire called. "Linda says you traumatized Olivia," she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "She's telling everyone you snatched the toys out of her hands and made her cry on purpose." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more out of frustration than amusement. "She's exaggerating as usual. Olivia refused to give back the toys. I calmly took them, and Linda did nothing to help. She even told me to just let Olivia keep them," Claire sighed. I figured, "Don't worry, I'll talk to her." Despite Claire's assurance, I knew this wouldn't die down quickly. Linda had a way of escalating even the smallest incidents, and sure enough, by that evening, the group chat with Claire's family was flooded with messages. Most of them were passive-aggressive remarks from Linda, claiming I'd been hostile and unkind to Olivia. A few family members chimed in to sympathize with her, but thankfully, others stayed silent, likely realizing there was more to the story. Claire jumped in to defend me. "Let's be clear," she wrote. "Emma's toys are hers. If Olivia wanted to take them, it's not unreasonable for my husband to say no. Linda, you should have stepped in instead of expecting someone else to resolve it." Linda's response came quickly and predictably. "I didn't expect such hostility over a few toys. Olivia is just a child. She doesn't understand these things, and now she's devastated. You don't have to be so heartless." At this point, I'd had enough. "Linda," I typed, keeping my tone measured. No one was hostile. I simply reminded Olivia that the toys belonged to Emma and couldn't leave our house. If Olivia is upset, that's something for you to address as her parent. Boundaries are important for kids, and it's not about the toys, it's about respect. The chat went quiet after that, though I knew Linda wouldn't let it go. The next morning, I woke up to find Claire scrolling through her phone with an annoyed expression. "Linda's now saying she might not come to Thanksgiving," she said, rolling her eyes. "Apparently, she doesn't feel welcome anymore." "Because I wouldn't let her kids steal our daughter's toys?" I said incredulously. Claire sighed. "It's just her way of stirring the pot. She wants everyone to take her side and feel sorry for her." This wasn't the first time Linda had caused family drama, and I doubted it would be the last. But as frustrating as her behavior was, what concerned me more was Olivia. Watching her meltdown over not getting her way had been eye-opening, and I couldn't help but think about what kind of adult she'd grow up to be if Linda's parenting didn't change. Linda had always believed that money and status could solve any problem. If Olivia wanted something, Linda gave it to her. If someone dared to say no, Linda framed it as a personal attack. It was no wonder Olivia had no concept of boundaries. She was being raised to believe the world revolved around her. And while that might be tolerable at 6 years old, it wouldn't be as harmless when she became a teenager or an adult. As I watched Emma play with her toy horses later that day, completely unaware of the drama they'd caused, I couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and concern. I was grateful that Claire and I were on the same page about teaching Emma respect and responsibility, but I worried about the example Olivia was setting. Kids notice these things, and if Emma ever started to mimic Olivia's entitled behavior, it would be a tough lesson to unteach. Over the next few weeks, the tension with Linda simmered, but didn't quite boil over. She eventually decided to show up at Thanksgiving, though her entrance was predictably dramatic. "I wasn't sure I'd come," she said loudly as she walked in, casting a pointed look in my direction. "But Olivia wanted to see her cousins." I ignored her, focusing instead on helping Claire set the table. Linda spent most of the evening holding court, complaining about everything from her husband's travel schedule to the lack of decent toys in stores lately. A clear jab at me. Olivia, meanwhile, flitted around the house, touching everything she could get her hands on, but miraculously avoiding another meltdown. At one point, I overheard Linda talking to one of Claire's aunts. "You know," she said, her voice low but not low enough, "some people just don't understand how hard parenting can be when you're busy and successful. Not everyone has the time to micromanage their kids." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to respond. It wasn't worth it. Linda thrived on conflict, and the best way to deal with her was to give her nothing to latch onto. As the evening wound down, I found myself sitting on the couch with Olivia, who was surprisingly calm for once. She was playing with a set of blocks that Claire had brought out for the kids, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the sweet child she could be. "Do you like building things, Olivia?" I asked gently. She nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. I'm making a castle. That's a great castle, I said, genuinely impressed by her creativity. Do you think Emma would like to build with you next time? Olivia looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. Maybe, she said, but only if she doesn't break it. I chuckled. Fair enough. Sharing can be hard, huh? She nodded again, this time with a little more understanding. It was a small moment, but it gave me hope. Maybe Olivia wasn't entirely lost to her mother's influence. Maybe, with the right guidance, she could learn that the world didn't revolve around her. As Claire and I drove home that night, I shared the interaction with her. She's not a bad kid, I said. She just needs someone to teach her boundaries. Claire smiled. Hopefully Linda figures that out before it's too late. I nodded, though I wasn't holding my breath. For now, all we could do was lead by example and hope that Olivia saw another way to be. Because if nothing changed, I feared the day Linda's entitlement caught up with her, and worse, the day Olivia learned to follow in her footsteps. It was a typical busy afternoon at McDonald's, the kind where the line stretched out the door and the hum of conversation mixed with the constant beeping of fryers and the occasional shout of, "Order number 47!" In the midst of the chaos stood Emma, a nervous but eager new hire on her very first shift. She'd spent the morning shadowing her trainer, learning the register and trying her best to keep up with the fast-paced environment. Now she was on her own for the first time, taking orders at the front counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she greeted the next customer, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and an air of impatience. The woman tapped her manicured nails on the counter while scrolling through her phone. "I'll have a Big Mac meal," she began, not looking up. "Large fries, a 10-piece nugget, 2 apple pies, and a caramel frap. Make it quick. I'm on a schedule." Emma nodded quickly, her fingers flying over the touch screen. "Of course, ma'am. Would you like any sauces with your nuggets?" The woman sighed heavily, finally glancing up. "Barbecue and sweet and sour," she snapped. "And don't mess it up. I've had enough bad service for one day." Emma forced a smile, hiding the sting of the comment. "I'll make sure it's perfect for you. That'll be $18.47. The woman swiped her card aggressively and stepped aside to wait, her eyes glued to her phone. Emma turned to her co-workers at the assembly line, relaying the order and double-checking the screen to make sure everything was accurate. Despite her nerves, she was determined to prove herself. A few minutes later, the woman's order was ready. Emma placed the neatly packed bag on the counter and called out, "Order 58!" The woman strode up, grabbed the bag, and muttered, "Finally!" Emma turned to help the next customer, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. But just as she began taking another order, the woman returned, her expression thunderous. She slammed the bag onto the counter, causing a hush to fall over the nearby customers. "Are you kidding me?" she barked. "You forgot my apple pies!" Emma froze, her heart sinking. She glanced at the receipt and then at the bag, quickly realizing the mistake. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me grab those for you right away." The woman raised a hand, cutting her off. "This is unacceptable! How hard is it to follow basic instructions? It's literally your job to get orders right." Emma's face flushed, and she stammered, "I'm really sorry. It's my first day, and First day or not, that's no excuse," the woman interrupted. "I paid for this food, and I expect it to be correct. You're wasting my time." At this point, Emma's manager, a calm and collected man named Mike, noticed the commotion and stepped in. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for the oversight," he said smoothly. "Let me fix this for you right now. We'll add a free drink to your order for the inconvenience." The woman crossed her arms, glaring at both Emma and Mike. "A free drink? That's it? My whole experience has been ruined. I shouldn't have to deal with this kind of incompetence." Mike stayed professional, his tone measured. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. We take this very seriously, and I'll ensure it doesn't happen again. I'll also refund you for the apple pies." But the woman wasn't satisfied. Her voice grew louder, her gestures more exaggerated. "A refund for the pies isn't enough. I want my entire meal comped. You wasted my time, embarrassed me, and made me stand here like an idiot while everyone else got their food." Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but Mike remained composed. "Ma'am, I've apologized and offered compensation. Unfortunately, I can't refund the entire meal over a missing item." The woman scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is the worst service I've ever received. What kind of place hires people who can't even put a bag together?" Other customers began murmuring, some shooting sympathetic looks at Emma, who was doing her best to keep her composure. One older man in line spoke up. "Come on, lady, it's just an apple pie. Cut her some slack." The woman turned on him, her eyes narrowing. "Mind your own business!" she snapped before pointing at Emma again. This is her fault, and she needs to take responsibility. Emma looked to Mike for guidance, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, he said firmly, I've done all I can to resolve this. If you'd like to speak to our corporate office, I'd be happy to provide their contact information. Otherwise, I'll need to help the next customer. The woman's jaw dropped, clearly not expecting pushback. She grabbed her bag and stomped toward the door. The door slammed shut behind her, punctuating her final threats of leaving bad reviews and getting the employee fired. The tension in the air lingered for a moment, with customers and employees exchanging glances. Some of the patrons shook their heads in disapproval, muttering under their breath about her behavior. Emma, the new cashier, took a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. She could still feel the heat of embarrassment burning in her cheeks, but she forced herself to focus on the next task. Next customer, please, she called out, her voice quieter than usual. The next customer, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, stepped forward and placed her order. Don't worry about her, sweetheart, she said gently. Some people just enjoy making others miserable. You're doing great. Emma smiled faintly, her confidence bolstered by the woman's kindness. She completed the order efficiently, handing over the bag with a quiet, thank you. One by one, customers continued to approach, most offering words of encouragement or supportive smiles. Slowly but surely, the knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. When the line thinned out, Mike, the manager, walked over to her, his expression calm but serious. Emma, are you okay? He asked, leaning against the counter. She nodded, though her voice wavered slightly. Yeah, I'm fine. I didn't expect something like that on my first day. Mike offered her a reassuring smile. It happens more often than it should, he admitted. Some customers think yelling and making demands will get them what they want. But you handled it well. You stayed polite, and you didn't let her rattle you. That's all I can ask. Emma relaxed slightly at his words. I thought I messed up. You didn't, Mike said firmly. You apologized for the mistake, offered to fix it, and stayed professional even when she wasn't. That's more than enough. Don't let her get to you. A few other co-workers chimed in as they gathered around. Yeah, you did fine, one of them said. We've all dealt with customers like her. You'll get used to it. Another added, you didn't lose your cool, and that's what matters. If anyone here deserves criticism, it's her, not you. Their words were a balm to Emma's frazzled nerves. She managed a small laugh, saying, Thanks, everyone. I guess I didn't expect so much drama over an apple pie. You'd be surprised, Mike replied with a chuckle. In this job, you see it all. As the team returned to their stations, the lunch rush picked up again. Emma found herself getting into the rhythm of taking orders, preparing bags, and handling payments with increasing ease. The incident from earlier still lingered in the back of her mind, but with each successful interaction, she felt her confidence slowly rebuilding. Later in the day, during a brief lull, Mike called her into the small break room at the back of the restaurant. He handed her a clipboard with a few forms. I wanted to document what happened earlier, he explained. It's not your fault, but in case she follows through on her threat to file a complaint, I want to make sure your side of the story is on record. Emma hesitated for a moment, but nodded. She sat down and carefully wrote out her account of the incident, detailing the woman's behavior and her own attempts to resolve the situation. When she finished, Mike read over it, nodded in approval, and filed it away. If she does leave a bad review or call corporate, don't worry, Mike said. We've got your back. It's clear you handled things as best you could. Emma thanked him, feeling a wave of gratitude. She realized that while some people might go out of their way to make life difficult, she wasn't alone in dealing with them. Her manager and co-workers had her back, and that made all the difference. By the time her shift ended, Emma felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Her first day had been anything but smooth, but she'd weathered the storm and come out stronger for it. As she packed up her things and prepared to leave, one of her co-workers called out, Hey, first day's the hardest. It only gets easier from here. Emma smiled, waving as she walked out the door. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a reminder that even difficult days have their moments of beauty. As she headed home, she reflected on the experience. Yes, it had been stressful, but it had also taught her an important lesson. No matter how difficult some people can be, staying calm and composed is the best way to handle them. She resolved to come back stronger the next day, ready for whatever challenges might come her way. After all, if she could survive her first run-in with a difficult customer, she could handle anything. And that's a wrap on today's stories. These moments remind us how important it is to stay calm and stand your ground when faced with entitlement or unfair demands. Whether it's in your workplace, your neighborhood, or even within your own family, kindness paired with firm boundaries can make all the difference. If you enjoyed these stories, Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more tales like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts, or even your own experiences. Drop them in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.